It's now time for your Election Crimes Bulletin with Greg Palast.
And this is Dennis Bernstein with Greg Palast. This is your Election Crimes Bulletin on the Flashpoint Show on Pacifica Radio. Always great to have Greg. By the way, if you want to follow his work, follow Greg's work at gregpalast.com. We'll give you that again at the end. You can check out all our broadcasts at flashpoints.net. Greg Palast, a lot is popping. It looks like the folks in Georgia are getting a little bit nervous about the district attorney there, and they're trying to create some more laws to shut her down.
As you know, we keep coming back to Georgia for a good reason, because it's ground zero of vote suppression and vote chicanery. And obviously, where Trump put his efforts by trying to get the officials to overturn the election. And so we have Fani Willis, a district attorney. She's a locally elected official. And so there's a new law that was just passed in the Georgia legislature, which says that the legislature can now punish and remove prosecutors that they believe are acting in an improper manner. And you have to understand, we're talking the Georgia legislature. Their idea of improper manner is anything to the right, to the left of Proud Boys. So what they want to do is obviously shut down Fani Willis, her prosecution and her investigation into the overthrow of the election. She's about to impanel that second grand jury to bring indictments, which could be against Trump. Certainly, we're almost certain to see it against his top officials, probably Rudy Giuliani and others. And so they're basically trying to pull the prosecutor. You know, it's like when a cop arrests someone, you go arrest, then you go and fire the cop and let the bandit go. That's the scheme, that's the plan, and that's only one of their little laws that they've been busy putting together.
No, and it is very clear, Greg, that you've been on to something for some time, and we're seeing some of the folks come around, some of the corporate folks start to mention your work, start to see the level of repression, voter suppression that's going on. But it's so interesting today. I want to get to SB 222, and that came up on one of the corporate networks today. But the amazing thing is they were flabbergasted how thorough it was in voter suppression, but then they did a song and dance about glorifying this guy Raffensperger. So how do you square the two?
Well, I don't. I square the mainstream media and their love of Brad Raffensperger, who, today Stacey Abrams' group Fair Fight just put out a video saying that Georgia is embarking on the most vicious Jim Crow vote suppression crusade. It was bad last year. Remember, we had SB 202, known as Jim Crow 2.0, and that almost stole the election of 2020 and the re-election of Senator Warnock, because it didn't work. He still squeaked through against Herschel Walker, which just shows you how deep the vote suppression techniques were. Yeah. Now they have SB 221 and SB 222 because it just 202 was not good enough. There were still black people figuring out how to vote, and that had to come to an end, and young people, especially in the Atlanta area. So SB 222 is kind of called the anti-Zuckbuck law. If you remember, a billionaire Republican named Mark Zuckerberg, and I want to emphasize he's a Republican, decided to do a civic thing and offer money around because we had a pandemic and many elections boards simply could not handle the pandemic. They lost workers and everything, so they had to expand and massively expand the use of absentee voting in drop boxes. Well, Republicans were at first happy about the Zuckbucks, because absentee balloting was used in Georgia and other states mostly by Republicans. And Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the absentee ballot and drop box vote in 2016. But in 2020, with Trump going on a crusade against mail-in ballots, even though they're used mainly by Republicans, it reversed. And you had they made voting very easy. And as a result, Biden, Ossoff, and Warnock all won in Georgia. And we see this across in Texas, Florida, other states where making drop boxes available massively increased the number of young voters and young voters of color in particular. In fact, 49% of all young people voted by absentee ballot, either mailing it in or in a drop box, and it's more than half of young voters of color, more than half, according to Tufts University. So he said, since most young black people vote by drop box in Georgia, and they're more likely to use the drop boxes than sticking in a mailbox for good reason in Georgia and in other states like Texas. So they ended up cutting back the number of drop boxes radically in the 2020 election. You could only have one drop box for 100,000 voters, active voters. 100, and that was the law. But still, Warnock won. So now Georgia's SB 221 eliminates all drop boxes.
All of them.
None. So even if you have to use the mail system, which it's notoriously bad for getting in ballots late, because in Georgia and other states, they've, instead of saying, well, like in California, you mail in your ballot, if it arrives at the elections office within a week of the election, it counts. But in Georgia, it has to arrive by 7 p.m. on Election Day at your polling station. And that type of restriction is happening all over to make it so that they disqualify the mail-in ballots, which are now running 2-1 Democratic, as opposed to when they used to be majority Republican. So now they want to eliminate all drop boxes in Georgia. They want to eliminate prosecution of real election crimes, but they are making it a crime for a local election official to take any foundation money, any nonprofit money, any money from anywhere to fund election operations, like to fund drop boxes, et cetera. Well, they won't have drop boxes, but you're talking about these rural Georgia counties, especially the poor black counties, that just don't have the funds. And they're cutting their funds, and they're saying you can't seek funds elsewhere. So they're literally basically making it impossible for local elections boards to even conduct elections. It's absolutely murderous. Plus, they're expanding 2-1. It just goes on and on. Like you say, it's huge. And it increases the vigilante challenges. Yeah.
It's unabashed, Greg, and you are among the very, very few that are on top of this. Like I said, they don't get the context. That's why any fear they express about these drop boxes, the subject came up today, is immediately clamped down by. But even Republicans are against this kind of stuff, like Brad Raffin. So the reporting is still a big challenge, and people understanding this.
Well, one of the problems is that they don't understand that. Well, and they don't want to understand. So you had this big play-up of the Republican Secretary of State on 60 Minutes, on MSNBC. He's like the hero of MSNBC because he did stand up to Trump. There's no question about it. When Trump wanted to muscle him to find 11,000 votes, he didn't want to go to prison. But you have to understand, this guy is more of a, makes Catherine Harris of Florida, remember the infamous Cruella de Vil of Florida, who removed tens of thousands of black people from the vote. I mean, she's like Thomas Jefferson compared to Brad Raffensperger, and Fair Fight called him out today, but can't get the national people. So the problem is that when he endorses these moves, they're buying the line that this is to improve voting, or to use Brian Kemp's little catchphrase, make voting easier but fraud harder, which is kind of difficult. Why they need anti-fraud laws? Because Raffensperger, when under oath, he testified he couldn't find a single fraudulent vote out of 5 million, not one fraudulent vote. Yet they have all these laws to stop the vote fraud.
And he said it a lot of times, so he must have really meant it. You're listening to the Election Crimes Bulletin on Flashpoints. We're speaking with Greg Palast, who's easily reached at gregpalast.com. You can see these Election Crimes Bulletins completely at flashpoints.net as well. Greg, let's turn our attention to True the Vote. I mean, we're bringing back these organizations, but it's crucial because they will continue to play a key role in suppressing the vote. True the Vote, what happened?
Okay, Stacey Abrams brought a suit some months ago, but that's her organization is Fair Fight Georgia. Yeah. And as you know, for those of you who've seen my film Vigilante, which we will re-release for next year as we update it, But the film Vigilante...
Well worth seeing, folks. Well worth seeing. Believe me, it's not, some of the documentaries I've seen had good information, but they are a freaking bore. This one, you won't be bored. I'm sorry.
No, you won't be bored. You'll be spitting out your popcorn.
Exactly.
But the thing is that what we exposed was this whole system of voters who are non-government people, just self-styled vigilantes who are challenging people en masse. They challenged over 100,000 voters before the Georgia Senate midterm election Senate race. And our campaign pretty much stopped it cold, but they're not done because the new Georgia law, 221, which I expect Kemp to sign shortly, will expand will give more authority to these vote challengers. Because a lot of, for example, I was in Gwinnett County, which is actually the biggest county in Georgia. It's a piece of the suburbs of Atlanta. And Gwinnett simply rejected 33,000 challengers. I was there. They had seen my material, and they said these challenges are junk. Now, the new law will basically say the local officials, even if they know the challenges are bogus, can't just challenge the challenges. And specifically, things like they said you could use – they had people trolling black voters and Hispanic voters on Facebook to see, this guy he's writing from Texas. He bought a car in Texas, and it's on his Facebook page. Well, it turned out I checked that one out. That was another soldier assigned to Fort Hood, Texas, and they challenged his vote, saying he bought a car and has a girlfriend in Texas. But he is, of course, Hispanic, so of course. But this is the type of thing and if it were just Georgia, which is bad enough because it is the ultimate swing state for the Senate races and the presidency, of course. But whatever happens in Georgia, that's the test drive. That's the Klan's test kitchen for vote suppression trickery. It goes everywhere. It goes to Texas. It goes to Florida, Arizona, Wisconsin. It's not just the Deep South where we have these shenanigans. You see Jim Crow up in Wisconsin like nobody's business, where it's a blood fight right now. And unfortunately, we're about to have an election next week in Wisconsin for the head of their Supreme Court. It'll determine, this is vitally important because that Supreme Court has stood in the way of vote suppression tactics that have been passed by the right-wing gerrymandered legislature. And now this vote will be conducted after they've flushed out tens of thousands of people using a ridiculous system of purging voter rolls. So it's not just Georgia, and I want to emphasize that, but we focus to Georgia because that's where the right-wing focus is. That's where they learn their tricks.
Absolutely, and that's where they demonstrated how violent they would be at the national level. Again, we're speaking with Greg Palast. This is the Election Crimes Bulletin. He's at gregpalast.com. Ginny Thomas was back in play today. Apparently, she's been very busy and very engaged. Should we not be bothering? She's just somebody's wife.
Well, we should congratulate Ginny Thomas because she is the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And Ginny has been able to pocket $595,000 through a group where she raised something through something called crowdsource, but it turns out that's just a hand-waving cover. The money comes to her, and this is supposed to be, we don't even exactly know what it's for except to push some type of pro-Trump agenda. If you remember, Ginny Thomas has already been tweeting Mark Meadows to fight the election and to have it overturned. Mark Meadows was the chief of staff to Trump. She was encouraging the actions which led to January 6th. She's quite a piece of work, but, it's a free country, as they say, except for one thing. She is married and has a bank account with the Supreme Court justice. So the question is this a conflict of interest? And understand the money she raised, as it turns out, traces back to Donors Trust. Now, Donors Trust is the kind of right-wing billionaires' cover of their favorite cover for their donations. Their number one donor into Donors Trust is Charles Koch. So Donors Trust, while it has other billionaires there, is basically a Koch interest front. And that's who's paying Ginny Thomas the wife of a Supreme Court justice.
And she was also engaged in the scheme, the fake electorate scheme, right? She was pushing that one around.
Yes, and I should mention, you mentioned True the Vote and Fair Fight. Fair Fight has sued True the Vote, which is the group that came up with the attack on drop boxes in that film 2,000 Mules. It's in, I take it apart in my film Vigilante, but 2,000 Mules, while people sneer at it and laugh at it, it was launched at Mar-a-Lago by Donald Trump. You may sneer and laugh, but it's been very, very, very effective in closing off absentee ballot drop boxes. Like I say, in Georgia, they're going to eliminate them completely. In other states, they're cutting them way back. And this is because of this group 2,000 Mules, which falsely claimed that thousands of black men, and I want to emphasize, they emphasize that it's black men, except for some Hispanics in Arizona. And they emphasize the racial aspect of it, that you have black men who are illegally stuffing ballot drop boxes. Now, they claim that they had videotape and everything else. The truth is that despite all the videotape and everything else, they could not identify a single actual fraudulent voter. They never mentioned their name. They cover the license plates. Well, it turns out we were able to identify some of the people that they accused of stuffing ballots. One is an African-American high-tech exec in Atlanta who was putting in his ballot and his wife's ballot. He was the central villain, a guy that they said, we are watching O.J. Simpson in the commission of a crime. So they see a black man. He's O.J. Simpson, a murderer in the act of committing a crime. So he has sued them. Now Fair Fight, Stacey Abrams has sued them, saying that this is mass intimidation in violation of the Voting Rights Act. A judge has just ruled, Judge Stephen Jones in Atlanta has ruled that Fair Fight must go to trial. And their so-called expert, a guy named Greg Phillips, who is like a high school math teacher, he's their expert. The judge ruled that he has no idea what he's talking about and doesn't qualify as an expert. So they're going to have a tough case. But I will say, and guess what? Here's another new news. The Biden administration has joined in the case on the side of Fair Fight. So, it looks like the Justice Department has discovered Georgia. Glad that they've joined the club. We've been, 11 years? 10 years, yeah.
Does that suggest that maybe Stacey Abrams might be acceptable for the rabbit-scared Democratic Party? Are they... we could have her as governor of Georgia now if there was real.
Yes, I mean, there is little question. We did a very careful analysis of the votes in 2018. There's no question that if they hadn't illegally, massively purged the voter rolls of 1/3 Georgians, everyone, we checked out their names, everyone were legal voters. They were blocked. If not for that, Stacey Abrams would be governor. And I think that, yes, I think Stacey Abrams is acceptable to the mainstream up to a point. I'm glad that the Justice Department has come in. Now it's not clear. They are claiming that they're a party. How much they will actually support all of Fair Fight's positions, I don't know. But at least that they are participating in the case. That's a big, big change. Obviously, it's a monster change from the Trump administration. But finally, we have the feds coming in on the side of protecting what's little left of the Voting Rights Act.
All right, let's talk about spouses because Ginny Thomas isn't the only spouse that was engaged during somebody's 10-year. This one is Hillary Clinton. Now, she was very engaged, wasn't she? Clinton Foundation.
This is one of the things we have to that we have to face squarely. While a lot of the progressive groups and MSNBC, et cetera, are screaming that here's Ginny Thomas, wife of the Supreme Court Justice, accepting basically political action funds and lining her pockets with money from advocates who will be in front of her husband's court. So to say that's a conflict of interest, you don't need a PhD in poli-sci to know that is a conflict of interest. It's just not against the law as we have it. we do have to remember that we had this same problem with the Clinton family. When Hillary Clinton was our foreign minister, that is Secretary of State, the Clinton Foundation, which had apparently promised not to raise money from most nations, exceptions being Canada, Israel, and the U.S., but we know that the Hillary and Bill Clinton Foundation received about roughly $36 million, 30-some million dollars from a guy named Justi, who obtained the exclusive contract to mine uranium out of Kazakhstan. He arrived with Bill Clinton. He had Bill Clinton in his private jet. Bill Clinton meets with the president, that is the dictator, Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan. Immediately after that meeting, a few minutes later, Justi goes in and comes out with an exclusive contract for the uranium, then makes this donation to the Clinton Foundation. And then, as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton asked for the removal of the name of the dictator, Nazarbayev, from the indictment against Mobil Oil for bribing the dictator of Kazakhstan. So his name was left off. He was simply called KO2. And the reason why is that important? Because by leaving off the name of the dictator, he would not be indicted. He was just an unnamed recipient of the bribe. Why did we do that? Now, the question is, did we do that because the Clinton Foundation got $32 million from him indirectly, or was that in the interest of the United States? I don't think it was in the interest of the United States to pleasure this dictator. It also had a terrible effect in Kazakhstan, which is that if you were in Kazakhstan and you mentioned that the president received a bribe, you'd go to prison for it's kind of a lèse-majesté law. So you would go to prison, and because there's no statement anywhere in an official courtroom that he took the bribes, he's just KO1. So, in other words, there are people in prison because of this decision in Kazakhstan, if they're lucky. And again, I agree that, yes, the liberal left is calling for rules about spouses when they have a similar, share a bank account. But that should also apply, I hate to say it, to the Clintons.
So it wasn't a good phone call, a perfect phone call?
Yes, yeah, a perfect private jet landing in Kazakhstan. Nothing was wrong with it. As Bill Clinton said, he didn't tell the president of Kazakhstan to give his buddy, who just brought him on a private jet, the contract, except that I suspect that President Nazarbayev happened to know that the man he's speaking to, that his wife is Secretary of State of the United States and the likely next president.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. Yeah, I agree. We do have to say, if you're going to be on the Supreme Court, if you're going to be Secretary of State, if you're going to be President of the United States, I think that you've made a decision for your family that they cannot be cashing in, especially when they share a bank account. I happen to know that Bill and Hillary file a joint taxes and one set of bank accounts. So it all goes in the same pocket.
Well, he deposited, but he didn't inhale. Listen, we just have a minute or two left. So
Yes.
Usually, Greg, you're a wonderfully colorful reporter, but you don't speculate. But how about this? What do you think? There are a lot of investigations going on now. How do you think this is going to break? Just your gut feeling.
Well, yeah, like you said, I'm not a speculator, but the information we have is pretty clear that there's almost certain to be an indictment in New York for falsifying records. The question is whether the DA can prove that the hush money paid to Stormy Daniels constitutes an illegal campaign contribution. Now, there was a conviction along these lines before when there was hush money to cover up John Edwards getting one of his followers pregnant. And hush money was paid to her, and Edwards was, in fact, convicted of illegal campaign contribution. So we'll see. What happens in Georgia, we don't know. If they pull Fani Willis off the case, I think that it will, you know what? I can't imagine that anyone, any prosecutor in Georgia is going to let this go. Whether it includes Trump or not, that's the real open question that no one could say. But absolutely, we have people who at least prima facie committed mail fraud by saying that they had won election as electors representing Donald Trump when they didn't even run, let alone win the vote. We know Biden won those elector votes, but these are people who didn't even run. So, and whoever organized that, if they can prove Trump was part of the organization, it's pretty hard to say that's not a felony crime. What they're going to have to do is prove that he knew about the scheme and may have to prove that he knew it was illegal as well. Not so easy. Right. It's not easy.
Greg Palast, that's Greg Palast at gregpalast.com. This is the Election Crimes Bulletin. You can check it out at gregpalast.com or at flashpoints.net. Greg, as always, we appreciate the great information and how generous you are with your time for our show. So we appreciate it.
I'll be back. Bye.
All right. Stay safe.